Welcome to the show. And today we have Anish, who writes for Business Standard, and he's been covering aviation for a while. So, thank you, Anish, for joining in this latest podcast where we try to go behind the people and understanding people who give news to others. Right. So, it's not about
Thank you
the
for opportunity, Amaya. Really a pleasure to be in this interaction with you.
Thanks, thanks. So, Anish, let us begin with some very basic questions. How long have you been in journalism? You've been writing in Business Standard for a while, but overall in journalism, how long have you been?
Well, I've been in full time active journalism as a career since the year 2000. Business Standard I joined in 2011. So prior to that, I was in the Free Press Journal in the Times of India, Mail Today, and Mumbai Mirror before moving to the Business Standard.
Interesting. And do you have a background in terms of family being in journalism, or you are the first person from the family?
Well, no one working full time, so I guess uh, the only possible connection could be one of my uncles writing letters to the editor. Brother does write occasionally for one of the, you can say, a suburban publication, but it's more of his interest or inclination that he has been writing stuff. But otherwise, no one from the family has been a journalist. So I think I'm the first.
So then, how was the reaction when you decided to get into this field?
Ah, so it's not that it happened overnight. So I did post graduation in history. I don't remember precisely when. Could be the final year of my graduation, or perhaps the year before that. But certainly during my post graduation days, I used to contribute articles on, say, I mean, I started with Free Press Journal really. So they had pages dedicated to youth. Then they used to come out with a cinema supplement and some page dedicated to women, and they had a Sunday supplement as well. So I would write, on on various topics. On, like, for the youth page, I started contributing some interviews or kind of opinion pieces. Looking back, when I look, I say, hey, what is that I wrote? But yeah, so it really started with that, contributing articles in Free Press. I did write one odd thing. I think one odd, in fact, just one. I think in the Sunday Observer. Just again one of those feature pages that they used to come out. And so I had no background or a formal training in news reporting, which is what I do. So it was more of writing that I took up. Going to events, covering it, and maybe just interviewing people or for the feature pages, just contributing. And that's how, after completing my masters, I just got a job. I just asked them, and then it was just like kind of on-job training kind of. It started for me. But when I started, I really had no understanding of reporting, so it was kind of just started working.
Interesting. And being from Mumbai, having your education in Mumbai, did it help to cover the local issues, or it would have been same had it been any other city?
Well, see, I one of the first. As you know, that we in journalism we call it beat, right? The sector that we cover. So currently, I do write on aviation, so quote unquote aviation beat. My first beat, so to say, in the Free Press Journal was municipal corporation. So the one of my colleagues was leaving the organization, and he just kind of took me to the municipal corporation headquarters. You might have seen that magnificent structure at the CST, opposite CST station, and
Right.
well, it did help. It did help in kind of course, the language, knowing the language helps, and I guess it's more of an inclination that one has about the area that one covers. So, but since you asked this about of being from a city, I'll narrate something that I did work 10 months in Nagpur, in Times of India Nagpur, when they launched there. And I don't have a family in Nagpur, so I wasn't familiar with Nagpur as such. So, and so I didn't have that kind of attachment to the city, the one that I have towards Mumbai. Or like, for instance, if since you stay in Pune, you're more familiar with the city than if you were to suddenly move to some other place, and maybe the locals there are far more interested or aware and far more attached. That kind of attachment I didn't have. So maybe that was the only difference, when I went to Nagpur. But otherwise, uh, growing up and staying in the state, it naturally helps. And more than that, I feel it's an inclination. So if you're covering, say, a municipal corporation, or later when I covered politics, briefly, so it's just about getting interested in the subject that you're covering.
Interesting, and that gets me to the next question. You referred about the aviation beat or any other beat, right? So how did you get into aviation? Was it luck, choice, chance, force? No, many options, but how did you end up in aviation?
What do you think could be? I pose a question back to you. What do you think could be the reason? I
Uh,
mean, possibly you might have. I mean, you can hazard a guess.
I would say a mix of luck and choice is how I would put it. But let's hear it from you.
Uh, well, I stay in Vile Parle, which is very close to the uh, airport, to Terminal 1 to be precise. And it was actually, I mean, it's not, I'm just narrating this, it's not how I landed with the aviation, but I'll tell you how I would get to get cover stories related to aviation. So in the Times of India, occasionally there would be requirement for someone to cover incidents or occurrences like evacuation flights or some high profile arrest somewhere, or I remember maybe the Air India strike, pilot strike during the SARS crisis 2004. So they would always require someone who would stay close to the airport to go and cover that. So uh, having stayed, or actually staying near the airport, it did help. And well, that's one. Second thing of, I would certainly say, of inclination and interest in the sector. So it was a choice, but in times of India back then, there were other reporters. There are other reporters. So I wouldn't get to cover that as a beat or as a sector for myself. But then when I moved to Nagpur, I mean, I worked there for 10 months, as I said. I took upon myself to cover airport. So I would write, I mean, whatever I could, I mean. So there of course, Nagpur back then in 2000, I think 2006, 7, there was, I mean, not so much of action, but yeah, new flight launches or occasionally some near misses in the skies and so on. So I would write whatever I could, having based in the city. Then I came back. I started writing on aviation again in Mail Today. Then when I moved to Mirror, there again I did initially, but again I would say that I covered it, and it just came to me. So when finally I moved to Business Standard, that's what I said that and they were looking for aviation reporter. So it was the proximity to airport, which gave me an opportunity to. Those weren't pure aviation stories. They were just kind of going to the airport. It possibly even could be like, funnily, like people who were arrested in Dubai and places like that if they were being deported to India, whatever. So, it was a mix of crime also at times, some bit of evacuation, human interest stories, but those had aviation angle, and then of course the interest and inclination I had early in my. This is just a bit of side information, not related to journalism, but I would ask these airlines to for if they could send me posters or any photos. I would write on postcards to the airlines. I would even collect the timetables, airline timetables. We used to have these timetables, like 20 years back. So those things I did collect. So there was, of course, this interest, and well, it just got translated into action over the course of years.
Very interesting story. So it's more of a Vile Parle beat than aviation beat or any other beat.
Well, so I think the ICAO code and IATA code for should change from BOM to VLP. Do you say that?
Yes, of course. So how many times did you get a glimpse of Dr. Malya? Right? The famous headquarters of Kingfisher, just right opposite Vile Parle.
Unfortunately, not much. And the reason for that, as I said, is that I started covering, say, aviation seriously from a business perspective is only when I joined Business Standard in 2011.
Right.
Uh,
Which was almost the
well,
last days of Kingfisher.
yes. Well, I, I mean, see, I came from Mumbai Mirror, and Mumbai Mirror. Uh, well, there was virtually no requirement for me to cover business-related stories. It's not that they wouldn't have taken it, but there was no demand as such from the paper to cover business-related stories. It was more of city-centric masala stories also at times. Some funny stories also you remember doing, but some good stuff as well. But I mean, nobody covered like a profit and loss and quarterly results. I mean, actually, I covered my first quarterly result when I joined Business Standard. So it was like learning all over again.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't have a chance to meet Dr. Malya as such, because back then when 2006, 7, 8, 9, I wasn't partly I was not in Mumbai, or I wasn't covering it as actively as some of my other colleagues were from a business perspective. So I mean, even if I wrote, say, aviation story, it probably wasn't a strategic story, which possibly would have been of interest to him.
Mm-hmm. Right. So now, quick two rapid fire questions. If not journalist, what would have been your career today?
I would have liked to be in the travel space. That's, I mean, I don't know what, maybe working at the airport perhaps. Now I can't say, since I do not work, so what exactly a kind of role, but yeah, maybe working at the airport or in the travel space. I would have liked to be. I could. I mean, if those are well paying, I could still perhaps go there. But I don't think there are enough opportunities now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the second question, again, a rapid fire one. If you have to interview one person in aviation, who would that be? Somebody you have not interviewed so far, but you would look forward to.
Ah, um, well, that's a, no. You just got me on the wrong one. I mean, I didn't really think that I'll have to tell you as to who's the one person I would want to interview. But I think, well, I have interviewed, but I have interviewed him. But and from a news perspective, Dr. Al-Bakr. Sorry, not Al-Bakr. His Excellency Akbar Al-Bakr. He is really a reporter's delight, in a sense. He does give you those quotes or makes those provocative statements. So he's always this person who would want to. I do not know about Rakesh Gangwal, how much he speaks, but Gangwal is someone who hasn't been interviewed any time, so possibly him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't think of anyone at the moment, but so
interesting. Two extreme ends of the spectrum, if I could say that.
Well, and you don't know, they have been wanting to at least cut their way, saying that we want to buy. So I don't know, maybe if that alliance happens, I could get a chance to interview both of them.
Both of them together, possibly. Never know,
Yeah.
right?
Uh,
So all the interviews
a
you've
question to
taken,
you: who would you like to interview? I mean, if you get a chance, whom you haven't.
I would skip it for now. I don't
No,
want
I
to.
mean,
I
I'm
don't
just
want to.
asking you so that. I mean, like, just someone, like, who would you like to interview? I mean, like, but that is just one person you want to meet, not an interview, but it's like one person you want to meet.
One person I want to meet in the aviation space. So yeah, honestly, I haven't thought who it would be. But if I want to meet that person and speak and understand, let's put it right, I would like to meet Dr. Malya and try and understand what went wrong and who were those people whom he relied upon. I was part of that airline. It was my first job after my MBA, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot that I learned two ways. One, what can be done, and the biggest thing I learned is what should not be done. So if I have
Uh-huh.
to interview somebody, I would actually interview him and try and understand where and how he thought he went wrong. And of course, I have my own analysis seeing it live. But yeah, if that is it, I know whom to do it.
So it will be a great story as well. And you can, of course, ask him when does he plan to return to India, or
No comments on that one. Let's
okay.
park it for
Or
now.
when he,
Move on to the next
okay,
one.
or does he plan to return to India, or is he going to be forced to? Anyway, yes.
Right. So right. So you've interviewed so many people, right? Any memorable one, and why? One good interview you think was memorable, or the first one, or the personality was interesting, or it became the most talked about interview.
I remember doing some interviews like this. I mean, I don't know if these were really memorable ones, but say, like, you used to have these air shows. You still do have air shows. So once, while interviewing Aditya Ghosh in the car, while, you have different venues, you have this airport and some of these events happening at the Taj Hotel. So getting to interview him in the car and then getting back and filing stories or filing the interview just after that. Then you did get opportunities on the internationals, of course. I mean the big ones, of course. You had the CEO of KLM, Peter Elbers was here. So those were a couple of interactions that I could have with him. Then, of course, uh, there have been a few interactions with CEOs of GoAir and Jet Airways also. Well, that happened. So those were pretty missing as well. I
You
mean,
said CEO of Go Air,
this was
right?
this.
You said CEO of Go Air.
Yes.
So how many
Which one
CEOs?
do
Yeah,
you?
which one? Yeah, exactly. Which one and how many CEOs of Go Air have you interviewed? Now that's the question. I should ask this to
See,
everybody. How many CEOs of Go Air?
I just kind of guessed your mind. Well, no, of the interesting ones, I mean, you did have that was, of course, a virtual interaction with Ben Baldanza. Of course, he's not in the CEO post, a vice chairman now, I guess, and a director on the board of GoAir. So, but that just came in post. Um, what shall I say? That came post the IPO filing and the controversy between the amongst the promoters. So we did get an opportunity to ask questions around that. You might have read it. And who else have I interviewed? I've interviewed Wolfgang, Giorgio Dioroni, uh, Vrishvishik, Kaushik. I haven't had a chance to interview though. We've spoken on phone, but no formal interactions with him since he has taken over. So yes, three. I have interviewed three CEOs. Vinay Dubey, of course, but not when he was in the GoAir. So, but three CEOs.
Interesting. And which was the most difficult interview, so to say? Not just Go Air, but any of all the interviews which you've taken, which was,
Difficult as in?
probably difficult to get an appointment, or the whole interview thing became difficult. The personality did not want to answer your questions, or if you found yourself in a challenging position during that interview.
can't think offhand, but the first part, it does happen a lot of times. You want to interview people, but they they don't. I mean, this is all company driven, so they don't want to talk to media at that point of time.
I'm
And
getting a glimpse of that now.
often you find that, I mean, they kind of have anticipated the questions. So it's like rare, I mean, it's they kind of anticipate the questions, and they generally have which which may not be say the answer that you're kind of looking, or you think that they are kind of fooling you, but uh, there is, I mean, in a format like that, I think that leaves you a little room to kind of contest, and when they have given you, say, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or 40 minutes or so, if you were to kind of contest and say, hey, well, I disagree with you, or the point that happens that you want to ask more, as many questions as you can. So uh, that's because you asked the question earlier as to which ones are interesting. I guess many a times they kind of tell you the same, kind of a copybook answers. That okay, it's a challenge, but we can face that kind of answers. So it's really, you really have to kind of look at, try and kind of cull out and say that, well, this is okay. This is a news element for me. So that at times becomes a challenge because well, I'm not saying that everybody should speak provocative, but if they were to tell you something more interesting, or going to give you some insight or perspective, well, maybe it's also a pointer to our homework. Maybe we need to ask some really good questions, or do a little more study before we talk to them. But yeah, I think I remember asking at least, I think uh, two questions. I don't exactly remember the question, but I remember asking uh, Jay Wadia a question which probably he didn't want me to ask on a telephone interview. I'll let you know what that was later. And once I think I asked Ajay Singh about when he took over the airline, and of course he has revived it, and the airline has kind of, well, kind of fought back, and through the crisis, when it was nearly to be shut down, it kind of came back, and it's the second or third largest airline now. Of course, it has its own share of problems. I think I asked him a question about he would say that what has been the equity funding that you have made in the airline, and I think he gave me an answer. I don't remember what exactly, but if you see that there hasn't been really much equity funding, I mean, if any. So, the point that I was trying to make is that, well, do you contest and kind of get in saying, no, what you're saying is not correct or something? Well, I guess at times you do face this difficulty, that because you have a limited time, and you don't really want to get dragged into some kind of an, I'm not saying argument, but get dragged or bogged into one question
Yeah,
too far.
not make it controversial or
Yeah, yeah,
counter questioning. It
yeah,
will
yeah. Sure.
interesting. So I need to remember which was the first aviation news which you wrote, and for which publication was it?
Ah, mm, well, I don't. I remember my first aviation article in Business Standard was around Air India Express. I don't remember which one. Express. My first aviation article in, I think I can't remember, because there are some 3-4 publications. So uh, mm, I wouldn't remember. I wouldn't remember. But in Business Standard, it was some story about Air India Express.
Interesting. The more people I talk to, they have similar stories that no,
Really?
they don't
They,
remember.
they don't remember.
Yeah, exactly. So really finding it
Well, maybe I might remember the first articles that I wrote. I still have kept those, but specific to aviation because I didn't start as an aviation reporter, right?
Mhm.
So that's why I didn't start as an aviation reporter. So
Correct. Right.
so I don't know. I mean, that's a good question actually. So I might have, but as I said that I'll tell you something. 2003, Jet Airways completed its 10th anniversary, and there was an event. I think they had an event in Renaissance Hawaii. Again, they asked me to go, but then back then I wasn't even like I wasn't in the. I mean, I was not trained to be an aviation journalist then. So I well, I remember Mr. Goel going around meeting his staff, colleagues, and there were so many of them. But I I didn't have that kind of aviation. I'm not saying inclination or interest, but I didn't have that kind of knowledge about aircraft leases, about strategy, about network, about revenues and locals. Yeah, that was one of the events that I remember attending. That was in 2003, and there were many other events. As I said, the Air India strike of 2003, during the SARS crisis, I remember attending some of those pilot IPG press conferences and so on. But I think I must have contributed to the stories or could have written stories myself. Well, if those could be my first stories, I do not remember because I don't particularly recollect those.
Something for you to ponder upon after this talk
Yes,
we have. So yeah, interesting, right? So no, this industry is more characterized by breaking news these days. The advent of social media,
yes,
online media, everything is moving more from a print to breaking, and you need to have more in-depth analysis the next
correct,
morning, right?
correct.
Any stories which where you were the one breaking the story? And second part to that question, any story which you knew but you were holding on to it, did not break it, and then somebody else did, and that's when you realized, oh, you should have done it.
I don't remember the second part, but one story that I remember is about say the stories that we wrote. But Vistara Brandon, I mean, we carried that story. I think that a day they were to announce or a day before. So we had learned earlier that they may name. I mean, but we wrote it this way that they may name it as Vistara. So the Tata Airlines will name it Vistara or something. So that was a good break that we did. Um,
It's typically
actually,
said that Vistara doesn't leak. You will not get any information out of that airline. They're very closely guarded with their
yes.
secret. But you got it probably because it was a day before the naming ceremony. Because
No,
they
so
say
this
Vistara
was
doesn't leak. So
no, they
for Vistara,
didn't.
you
I mean,
need
of course they didn't. They didn't. So we kind of got to know from industry that the airline will be called Vistara, and we wrote a story in that. I mean, they did reply to a query saying that we have registered many names, kind of thing. So they had not denied it. And I think we carried with the headline that Tata Singapore Airlines may be called Vistara or something.
Great, great. So that
So
gets us to the last question actually. And that's about your thoughts around the industry. You've been tracking it for a while now, uh, tracking all the airlines, airport space, and of course, COVID hit the industry and all of us badly in terms of the way things are moving. So where do you see the industry moving from here on? Your prediction for near future for aviation?
uh, is, I mean, prediction, are you talking of airlines, airports, domestic, international traffic, aircraft growth? So, or generally from a traffic perspective or from a stock perspective, or what is it? I mean, what
Definitely not stock perspective, but it's a overall general, what you feel, where is this industry moving with COVID around, or after the second wave and things still looking upbeat, or where do we go from here on?
And again, is it from an Indian perspective?
Yes, Indian perspective.
Well, let's look at this way. I mean, just today we had traffic, highest ever traffic since the resumption of domestic flights in May 24th. So I think we're today at 327,000. So I see that with the COVID cases on decline, and with 100% capacity already being allowed, though it's not going to be a 100% operation October end. But with the demand coming back, airlines should gradually add their flights. So we are going to see some healthy traffic growth on the domestic side. International side, uh, well, you see a lot. What are the drivers really? You have Indian leisure tourists who want to travel wherever they can, and the destinations which they are open, they are. Um, I wouldn't call it making a beeline everywhere, but that's certainly an opportunity for them to travel, and some of them really are. Students have traveled. I mean, despite all the challenges of having to quarantine of 14 days in Egypt, Serbia, Mexico, and places like that, people did travel. So, um, in absolute numbers, it would depend on well, of course, the first for government to take a policy decision to allow for scheduled flights. I am not very sure as to when we would reach to that kind of a capacity when you had Emirates alone operating 5 daily frequencies to Mumbai and 4 daily frequencies to Delhi and maybe three each to Chennai, Bangalore, and so on. I'm not so sure whether we're gonna see that so quickly. I mean, whether that kind of capacity would come back, given that there's still restrictions on travel in some of the countries. So, but yes, it'll certainly. I mean, it's if it was 20% or 30% of international traffic now, we should certainly see some growth. Um, there is this often this argument being put forth by Indian carriers that well, people would prefer non-stops instead of one-stop hops via um, say Dubai or well, it's I think yes and no. Uh, A is that it's about what Indians mostly look to travel when they travel is that they look at the fares and the connectivity. So if you look at the pre-COVID connectivity offered by Indian carriers, barring the United States, where the we were wearing, they're covering most of the big cities and do not as many cities as say, some of the other big carriers do, or in terms of frequency. But you have there, you have London, and you have frequencies one or twice a week, thrice a week, four times a week to many destinations in Europe. Now, with AirNet getting into Tata's fold, are they gonna look at that kind of network again, or will airlines would have to, I mean, or will passengers, uh, since there is no Indian carrier flying to those, will naturally be going on some European or Gulf carrier to travel to Europe. Um, so it's though that there is opportunity for Indian carriers to grow, and as we have discussed a couple of weeks back, that well, Indigo will surely try and go wherever it can. I mean, and of course those who depend as and when other markets open. Um, I see that for a while, if the government of India also allows scheduled international flights to open, you would see a lot more of the traffic going on international, the Gulf carriers, the European carriers, if indeed the same some of these destination countries open.
Right.
So
Basically.
international will grow, but it will be a little slower growth
Mm-hmm.
to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
The other big aspects, though, which though not immediate, but the Indian carriers will have to is that they'll have to look at what they, I mean, those certainly with international ambitions will have to look at, how do they get into being more eco-friendly or how on saving of fuel, on how do they keep their cost structures low, on looking at the finances, because ultimately those who have the best cost structures will be in the strongest position in the market. So I think that is, to my mind, if not an immediate challenge, say this week or this month or maybe even next month, I think way forward, if you see what airlines are going to do is that A, that they're going to look at, I mean, and this I'm talking from a global perspective, that A, they will invest in passenger convenience in providing features and products which the market wants, having a young fleet, trying to be as environmentally friendly as possible and keep the costs low. So Indian carriers will have to uh, do the same, whether they fly in India or whether they fly overseas. I hope
Interesting.
I could answer your question.
Yes, it interesting thought, Anish, and that gets us to the end of the recording of this podcast. Thanks a lot for being part of this podcast. Your inputs on aviation and understanding the journey and how you ended up in aviation has really been insightful. So I hope our listeners like it as much as I liked it right now. Thanks a lot again for being part of this.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the opportunity. Good luck.